Good morning. Page 368, 369, Chapter 3, The Ranks of Exile Thicken. Only the peasants were deported so ferociously to such desolate places with such frankly murderous intent. No one had been exiled in this way before, and no one would be in the future. Yet, in another sense, and in its own steady way, the world of exiles grew denser and darker from year to year. More were banished, they were settled more quickly, the rules became more severe. Who could offer the following rough time scheme? We could. In the 20s, exile was a sort of preparatory stage, a way station before imprisonment in camp. For very few did it all end with exile. Nearly all were later raked into the camps. From the mid-30s, and especially from Beria's time, perhaps because the world of exile became so populous, think how many Leningrad alone contributed. It acquired a completely independent significance as a totally satisfactory form of restriction and isolation. In the war and post-war years, the exile system steadily grew in capacity and importance together with the camps. It required no expenditure on the construction of huts and boundary fences, on guards and warders, and there was room in its capacious embrace for big batches, especially those including women and children. At all major transit prison cells were kept permanently available for women and children, and they were never empty. Exile made possible a speedy, reliable, and irreversible cleansing of any important region in the mainland. The exile system established itself so firmly that from 1948 it acquired yet another function of importance to the state, that of rubbish dump or drainage pool, where the waste products of the archipelago were tipped in so that they would never make their way back to the mainland. In spring 1948, this instruction was passed down to the camps. At the end of their sentences, 58s, with minor exceptions, were to be released into exile. In other words, they were not to be thoughtlessly unleashed on a country which did not belong to them, but each individual was to be delivered under escort from the camp guardhouse to the commandant's office in an exile colony, from fish trap to fish trap. Since the exile system embraced only certain strictly defined areas, these together constituted yet another separate, though interlocking country between the USSR and the archipelago, a sort of purgatory in reverse, from which a man could cross to the archipelago, but not to the mainland. The years 1944 to 1945 brought to the exile colonies unusually heavy reinforcements from the liberated occupied territories, and 1947 to 1949 yet others from the Western republics. All these streams together, even without the exiled peasants, exceeded many times over the figure of 500,000 exiles, which is all that the Tsarist Russia, the prison house of nations, could muster in the whole course of the 19th century. For what crimes was a citizen of our country in the 30s and the 40s punishable by exile or banishment? Bureaucrats must have derived some strange pleasure from this distinction, since, though not observed, it was continually mentioned throughout those years, when M.I. Brodowski, who was persecuted for his religion, expressed surprise that he had been exiled without trial. Lieutenant and Colonel Ivanov graciously explained the reason there was regard The reason there was no trial is because this is not exile but banishment. We do not regard you as a convicted person and are not even depriving you of your electoral rights. These, of course, being the most important constituent part of civil freedom. The commonest crimes can easily be indicated. 1. Belonging to a criminal nationality. For this, see the next chapter. 2. A previous term of imprisonment in the camps. 3. Residence in a criminal environment, seditious Leningrad, or areas in which there was a partisan movement, such as the Western Ukraine or the Baltic states, and many of the tributaries enumerated at the very beginning of this book branched out to feed the exile system, as well as the camps continually casting up some of their burden on the shores of exile. Who were these people? Above all, the families of men condemned to the camps, but families were by no means always drawn in, and it was by no means only the families of prisoners who poured into exile, just as it requires extensive knowledge of hydrodynamics to explain the currents in a fluid, without which you can only observe in despair the chaotically swirling and howling element. So here, we lack the information to study all the differential impulses which in various years, for no apparent reason, sent various people not to camps but into exile. We can only observe the bewildering mixture of resettlers from Manchuria, individual foreign subjects. Even in exile, they were not allowed by Soviet law to intermarry with fellow exiles who were nonetheless Soviet subjects. Certain Caucasians, no one remembers a single Georgian among them, and Central Asians, who, for having been prisoners of war, were sentenced not to the usual 10 years in camp, but a mere 6 years in exile, and some former prisoners of war, Siberians, who were sent back to their native districts and lived there as free men, without having to report to the police, but also without the right to leave the district. We cannot go into the different types of cases of exile because all our knowledge of it derives from casual stories or letters. If A.M.A. had not written his letter, the reader would not have the following story. In 1943, news came. In 1943, news came to a village around Vyatka that one of its Kolkhoz peasants, Kozurin, a private of the infantry, had either been sent to a punitive unit or shot outright. His wife, who had 6 children, the oldest was 10 years, the youngest 6 months old, and 2 sisters of hers, spinsters near 50, also lived with her, was immediately visited by the executants. You already know the word, reader. It's a euphemism for executioners. Yeah, we did know. They gave the family no time to sell anything. Their house, cow, sheep, hay, wood were all abandoned to the pilferers. Threw all 9 of them with their smaller possessions onto a sledge and took them 60 kilometers in a hard frost to the town of Vyatka, Kirov, why they did not freeze on the way, God only knows. They were kept for 6 weeks at the Kirov transit prison. Sent to a small pottery near Ukta. The spinster sisters ate from the rubbish heaps. Both were mad and both went mad and both died. The mother and the children stayed alive only thanks to the help, the politically ignorant, unpatriotic, in fact, anti-Soviet help of the local population. The sons all served in the army when they grew up and are said to have completed their military and political training with distinction. Their mother returned to her native village in 1960 and found not a single log, not a single brick from the stove where her house had been. A little cameo like this can surely be threaded on the necklace of our great fatherland victory. But nobody will touch it. It isn't typical. To what necklace will you add? To what category of exiles will you assign soldiers disabled in the fatherland war and exiled because of it? We know almost nothing about them. In fact, hardly anyone else seems to. But refresh your memory. How many such cripples, some of them still not old, were there crawling around the market tea rooms in suburban trains at the end of the war? Then their ranks were swiftly and discreetly thinned. This was also a campaign. They were exiled to a certain northern island, exiled because they had consented to be mutilated in war for the glory of the fatherland, and in order to improve their health, the health of a nation, which had by now won such victories in all forms of athletics and ball games. These luckless war heroes are held there on their unknown island, naturally without the right to correspond with the mainland. A very few letters break through, and this is how we know about it. And naturally, on meager rations, but because they cannot work hard enough to warrant generosity, I believe they are still living out their days there. The great purgatory in reverse, the land of exile that lay between the USSR and the archipelago, included big towns, small towns, settlements, and completely uninhabited areas. Exiles tried to get permission to go to the towns, rightly considering that it's easier there for the likes of us, particularly in the matter of work, and that their lives would be more like those of ordinary people. Perhaps the main capital of the exile world, and certainly one of its pearls, was Karaganda. I saw something of it before the end of general exile in 1955. The police had allowed me, an exile, to go there for a short time. I was going to get married to another exile at the entrance to what was then a hungry town, near the ramshackle station building, which trams could not approach too closely for fear of falling through into mine workings near the surface. And next to the tram turntable stood a truly symbolic brick house, its wall buttressed by wooden beams to prevent it from collapsing in the center of a new section of town. The words, "Coal is bread for industry," were set in stone in a stone wall, and indeed, black bread was on sale in the shops there every day. This was what made exile in town so much easier. There was heavy work to be had too, and some less heavy. For the rest, the food shops were pretty empty, while dizzy prices made the market stalls unapproachable. 2/3, if not 3/4, of the town's inhabitants at that time had no passports and were required to report to the police. From time to time, I was recognized and hailed in the streets by former Zeks, particularly Zeks from Ekibastus. What sort of life did an exile have there? At work, an inferior position and depressed wage? For not everybody, and the catastrophe of arrest, after the catastrophe of arrest, prison, and camp, had the means of providing his qualifications, and any allowance for length of service was still less likely. Or perhaps they were simply in the position of Negroes, who did not get paid on the same level as whites. If you don't want the job, you can please yourself. Then there was a great shortage of apartments. Exiles lived in unscreened corners of corridors, in dark box rooms, in little sheds. and always paid through the nose, because it was all rented privately. Women no longer young, worn to a frazzle by the camps with metal teeth, dreamed of having one crepe de china going out blouse and one pair of going out shoes. Then again, distances in Karaganda are great, and many people had a long way to travel to work. It took the tram a whole hour to grind its way from the center of the industrial outskirts, and the tram opposite to me sat a worn-out young woman in a dirty skirt and broken sandals. She was holding a child with a very dirty diaper, and she kept falling asleep. As her arms relaxed, the child would slide to the edge of her lap and almost fall. People shouted, "You'll drop him." She managed to grab him in time, but a few minutes later she would be falling asleep again. She was on the night shift at the water tower and had spent the day riding around town looking for shoes and never finding them. That was what Exile in Karaganda was like. As far as I can judge, it was much easier in Dojambul. In the fertile southern belt of Kazakhstan, food was very cheap. But the smaller the town, the harder it was to find work. Take the little town of Yenisek. When Ch03 Mitrovich was being taken there from the Krasnoyarsk transit prison in 1948, he asked the lieutenant escorting his party whether there would be work. "Of course there will," the lieutenant cheerfully replied. "And somewhere to live?" "Of course." But having handed them over to the command post, the escort went off, traveling light, while the new arrivals had to sleep beneath overturned boats on the riverbank or under open-sided sheds in the marketplace. They could not buy bread. Bread was sold to those with a fixed address, and the new arrivals could not register. To find lodgings, you had to put down money. Mitrovich, who was entitled to a disablement pension, asked for work in his own profession. He was a livestock specialist. The post commander did a bit of quick thinking and telephoned the agricultural department of the district Soviet. "Listen, if you give me a bottle, I'll give you a livestock specialist." This was a place of exile where the threat for sabotage, "You'll get a 5814, will put you back in the camp," frightened nobody. Another piece of information about Yeniseisk dates from 1952. One day, when they went in to report, the desperate exiles started asking the post commander to arrest them and send them back to the camp. Grown men, they could not earn their bread in that place. The post commander chased them away. The MVD isn't an employment office, you know. Here is an even more godforsaken place, Tasyevo, in Krasnoyarsk territory, 250 kilometers from Kansk. This was used as a place of exile for Germans, for Chechens, and Ingush, and for former sects. It is not a new place, not recently invented. The village of Kandali, where in the old days they used to forge chains. Kandali, for convicts, is nearby. But what is new there is a whole town of earth houses with earth floors. In 1949, a group of repeaters was brought there toward the evening and unloaded at the school. A commission met late at night to take over the new workforce. This commander of the district MVD post, someone from the timber cooperative, the Kolkhoz chairman. Before the commission passed in slow procession, people old and sick, exhausted by tenors in the camps, and most of them women. It was they whom the state in its wisdom had excluded from the dangerous towns and thrown into this harsh region to tame the taiga. The employers were reluctant to take such workers, but the MVD left them no choice. The most hopeless rejects among the goners were foisted on the salt works, whose representative was late for the meeting. The salt works were on the river Usoka at the village of Troitsk, also an ancient place of exile. Old believers were driven there in the reign of Alexei Mikhailovich. In the middle of the 20th century, the technique in use was this. They drove horses around in circles to pump brine onto filters and then obtained salt by evaporation. The firewood was brought from the logging sections, and this was where they hurled the old women into action. A successful and well-known naval architect had landed in this party. He was given a job as close as possible to his old profession, packing salt in boxes. Knuyazov, a 60-year-old worker from Kolomna, fetched up in Tassievo. He was past working and had to beg. Some people would take him home for the night. Sometimes he slept in the street. There was no room for him in the old people's home, and the hospital wouldn't keep him for long at a time. One winter's day, he crawled up the steps of the Raikom, the local committee of the Workers' Party, and froze to death. Zeks transported from a camp to Exile in the taiga, 20 degrees of frost, in the backs of open lorries, ill-clad, with only the clothes they were released in superannuated tarpaulin shoes, while the escort troops who were wearing sheepskin coats and felt boots could not believe their senses. Was their release to mean no more than this? In the camp there were heated huts, and here they had an earth house left by loggers, and unheated since last winter. The power saws had roared in the camps, and they roared here. The saws were the only means in either place of earning a ration of half-baked bread, so that new exiles were apt to make mistakes. And when in 1953 the deputy director of the timber enterprise, Leibovich, arrived all clean and handsome at Kuzeva in the Sukobos Buzim district, Yenisei, they took one look at his leather overcoat and his sleek, pale face and greeted him incorrectly. "Good day, Citizen Chief." Leibovich wagged his head reproachfully. No, what's all this citizen stuff? You must call me comrade now. You aren't prisoners anymore. The exiles were assembled in the one and only earth house. And the deputy director harangued them by the somber light of a spluttering oil lamp, like a man hammering nails into a coffin. Don't imagine that you are here temporarily. You will have to live here forever. So get to work as quickly as you can. If you have a family, send for them. If you haven't, marry among yourselves without delay. Build yourselves homes, have children. You will be given a grant for a house and a cow. To work, comrades, to work. Our country needs our timber. And with this, their comrade rode off in his motor car. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.